Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take your questions, dig into the source material, and hopefully build a kind of conversational shortcut to understanding.
That's the goal. And today we're tackling a big one, a really fundamental question that comes up so often in recovery circles.
Yeah, it's about step 3. Our listener basically asked, how do I do it? How do I actually turn my will and my life over? It sounds huge.
It does sound huge, and that's where people get tripped up, I think. They imagine needing some, massive spiritual event like lightning bolts or something.
Oh, like you said, signing a contract in blood.
Mm,
There's this idea that the action has to feel as monumental as the life change you're hoping for.
exactly. But, when you look at the program literature, the sources, they're pretty clear. Step 3 is actually, well, it's described as one of the simplest actions.
It's a decision, a single conscious choice.
Mm.
It's the moment you kind of metaphorically step down from being the CEO of everything.
That's a great way to put it. CEO of the universe, right? So we need to unpack that, the simplicity of the decision versus the, let's say, the weight of the concept.
Okay, so the step itself made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him.
Right, that's the core. It's the pivot point, the switch from relying just on yourself to relying on, well, something bigger, a higher power. But you can't really get there without steps 1 and 2 laying the groundwork. It's a logical progression.
Okay, let's start there then. Step 1, that necessary, sometimes brutal admission of powerlessness.
Mhm.
Why is it so vital to admit you're powerless before you can even think about trusting something else?
Well, think about it. If you still believe, even just a tiny bit, that you can somehow wrestle control back, that you can manage things on your own steam.
Then surrender feels like giving up, like defeat.
Exactly. Why would you hand over the reins if you think you can still drive? Step 1 is that fundamental reality check. It starts with admitting powerlessness over alcohol or your specific addiction, sure. But the sources, they push it much further.
They really broaden the scope, don't they?
They do. It's about admitting you're powerless over what other people think. Powerless over whether your flight gets delayed. Powerless over a job interview outcome. Powerless even over how the people you love choose to live their lives.
That's huge because it shifts the focus. It's not just the substance or the behavior anymore. It's about that whole mental framework of needing to control everything.
Right. If your life feels unmanageable, step 1 suggests it's because you've been trying to manage the unmanageable, trying to control things that are fundamentally outside your control.
We see that mapped out sometimes like in that gentle path chart you mentioned. It contrasts addiction and recovery behaviors.
Yeah, it often frames the addiction side as being sort of deluded about our own power and control. Step 1 is the move towards reality.
And that reality comes straight from the big book, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That line about probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism.
Yes. Once that sinks in, that my own best efforts, my self-reliance, haven't just failed but might actually be part of the problem, then the idea of turning things over starts to make sense. It goes from feeling like a weakness to feeling like a necessity.
But it's tough, especially if you've always been told, be strong, be independent, pull yourself up. Admitting powerlessness feels like failure.
Yeah.
So how do you get from that really difficult admission to the hope that step 2 offers?
Well, that's I think, the real genius of the sequence. Step 2 doesn't demand the sudden, complete, unwavering faith. It just asks for willingness.
Just willingness. That's the key, isn't it?
It's the only real hurdle before step 3, and it's framed so simply. The big book essentially asks, look, do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself?
It's like the lowest possible bar to clear,
Yeah.
spiritually speaking. But it's everything. It's a crack in the armor.
It is. And if you can say yes, or even just, okay, I'm willing to believe, the book says you're on your way, it doesn't require deep theology or a perfect picture of God.
No PhD in divinity needed.
Not at all. It's just accepting the possibility that something else, something outside of your own head, might have the solution that you've proven you don't have. Step 2 boils down to believing that God could and would if he were sought.
Without that little bit of belief or willingness to believe, step 3 doesn't really land, does it? It feels hollow.
Or just intellectually dishonest, maybe. You need that step 2 conviction first. I like how Al-Anon talks about it, too. They really emphasize the logic.
How so?
Well, they say once you truly accept the unmanageability in step 1 that your way isn't working, then deciding to trust your life to a higher power in step 3 isn't just some lofty spiritual idea. It becomes the most logical, practical thing to do.
Like a cost-benefit analysis almost. The cost of relying on yourself is chaos and pain. the potential benefit of trusting something else, well, it starts to look pretty good.
Exactly. You stop thinking, I should be able to handle this, and start thinking, I have to find another way because my way is clearly broken. And that realization, that necessity, sets the stage perfectly for the decision in step 3.
Okay, so preconditions met. We've admitted powerlessness. We're willing to believe something greater exists. Now, the core action. Step 3 itself. This is where our listener and many others get stuck. They're waiting for a feeling, maybe.
Yeah, trying to conjure up some profound sense of surrender, but the source is stress over and over. It's fundamentally a decision, an act of will.
It's right there in the wording. Made a decision, not felt an overwhelming urge or had a blinding flash of insight.
Precisely. It's a conscious choice.
Yeah.
You decide to turn your will and your life over to the care of God. That word care is important too.
Let's dig into that surrender aspect, because there's a kind of interesting paradox about control here, isn't there?
Yeah.
Your material mentioned a two-part nature to this.
Yes, that's a helpful way to look at it, drawing from some interpretations like in the Daily Reflections. Part 1 is consciously deciding to turn over your will. That's the active part.
Okay, my choices, my direction, my plans.
Right. But part 2 is simultaneously recognizing that your life is, and actually always has been, in God's care anyway.
Okay. Explain that a bit more. How does recognizing that help?
Well, think about the big picture. Who controls whether the sun rises tomorrow? Who controls how many days you ultimately have on this earth? Not you, not me.
Right. We don't control the fundamental conditions of existence.
Exactly. So acknowledging that our lives are already under a higher power's purview in that ultimate sense is just facing reality. We never truly controlled life itself.
So the life part is acknowledging reality. But the will part, that's the conscious act. That's where we make the choice.
That's where the decision lies. You're not transferring ownership of your life like a piece of property. You're consciously releasing your grip on the one thing you thought you controlled absolutely. Your self-will, your moment-to-moment choices and reactions.
And that's the paradox. Letting go of that illusion of control is actually where the power comes from.
That's what opens the door. It leads to genuine spiritual growth. Chuck C., one of the insightful early voices, talked about this a lot. He basically said real freedom only starts when we stop fighting the way things are and turn over that stubborn, often self-destructive will.
Okay, but here's a common hurdle. What if I'm an atheist? Or agnostic? Or maybe just deeply suspicious of organized religion because of past experiences? How do I do step 3 with all that God language? Doesn't that kind of kill the spiritual freedom it promises?
That's a really important question, and it's exactly why the phrase, as we understood him, is so crucial. It's arguably the most brilliant part of the step.
Because it allows for a personal definition.
Completely personal. The fellowship, the program itself, insists on it. It keeps spirituality from being gatekept by any specific doctrine or church. The sources are full of examples of this working. Well, for some early members, especially when AA was just starting, their higher power was simply the group itself. The collective wisdom and strength of other sober alcoholics, that was a power greater than themselves, capable of doing what they couldn't do alone, stay sober.
Yeah, I remember reading stories like that in Came to Believe. People saying their first higher power was maybe the first few sober people who reached out to them. They just trusted them initially.
That's a perfect example of it in practice. The key thing, as some of the older spiritual writings like In Tune with the Infinite suggest, is turning over the will. The specific name or form of the power you turn it over to isn't the main point, initially at least.
So it's more about the act of trusting something outside of yourself.
Trusting something firmer and safer and surer than self, as that book puts it. If you can conceive of any power, love, the universe, the group, natural laws, whatever that is wiser and more constructive than your own isolated, often fearful self-will, then that's enough to make the decision. The understanding evolves. The decision itself is the signal that you're opening the door.
Okay, let me push on that a bit, though. What about someone who's been through significant trauma or hardship? The idea of turning things over to the care of some power might feel, well, terrifying. What if I trust this power and then awful things still happen? Doesn't that just prove I should have stayed in control?
That's a very real and understandable fear.
Yeah.
And the answer, I think, lies in clarifying what we're turning over and what we expect. We turn our will and life over to God's care, not to a guarantee of a life free from pain or difficulty.
So it's not about controlling outcomes.
It's absolutely not about controlling outcomes. That's what self-will tries to do and fails at, causing immense suffering. Step 3 is the spiritual recognition that my desperate attempts to control outcomes were the source of my misery and unmanageability.
Okay.
So yes, difficult things might still happen. Life will still involve challenges. But the promise is that by making this decision, you gain access to a spiritual resource, a strength beyond your own, to handle those situations differently, without resorting to the old coping mechanisms, without the self-destruction.
So it's less about stopping the storm and more about getting an anchor and a better way to navigate it.
Beautifully put. You stop trying to control the wind and the waves. You focus on steering your own ship with guidance. That's the freedom step 3 offers.
Okay, let's shift to why our own self-will is considered so flawed in the first place. Society often celebrates strong will, ambition, drive. Yet the program literature is pretty blunt. A life run purely on self-will can hardly be a success. Why is it seen as such a liability?
Because the core requirement for even considering step 3 is getting convinced of that very point, that my own best thinking and my own willpower got me into this mess. The big book describes it vividly.
That collision part.
Exactly. Running on self-will, it says, means we're almost always in collision with something or somebody. Even if our motives seem good on the surface, we're constantly pushing, resisting, fighting. It's exhausting. That's the feeling our listener is probably grappling with.
That constant friction. Fighting traffic, fighting the boss, fighting your partner, fighting the urge, fighting yourself. It feels like the whole world is pushing back.
And the program suggests that resistance is because our self-will is trying to force things that aren't meant to be forced. Like that jigsaw puzzle analogy from one of the reflection books.
Right, trying to jam the wrong piece into the wrong spot.
Yeah, you're trying to force your square peg into life's round hole. It just leads to frustration, exhaustion, and ultimately failure, instead of letting things fit together naturally.
Let's talk more about that willpower itself. It's often not a lack of will, is it? People struggling with addiction often have incredibly strong, albeit destructive, willpower.
Absolutely, that's a critical point. The literature points out our whole trouble had been the misuse of willpower. We weren't lacking force. We were lacking constructive direction.
We were aiming it at the wrong targets.
Precisely. We tried to, as one source puts it, bombard our problems with it. We used willpower to try and control our drinking, or using maybe, or control what someone else did, control the outcome of a situation, control our feelings even, all things that are ultimately unmanageable by sheer force of will.
Instead of,
As the quote continues, attempting to bring it into agreement with God's intention for us, meaning aligning our will with a more constructive, perhaps spiritual path.
So step 3 isn't about eliminating will altogether, becoming passive.
Not at all. It's about redirecting that powerful engine of will. Instead of aiming it outwards to control the uncontrollable, you aim it inwards. You use your will to make the decision to follow guidance, to take the next right action, to control your own thoughts and attitudes.
That gentle path chart contrast makes this clear, right? It contracts the addiction characteristics with the recovery goals.
Yes, it explicitly lists controlling willful as the addiction characteristic. And what's the recovery sought through step 3? Faith in others, letting go.
So the decision literally redirects that drive, away from managing the world towards letting go and trusting a better source of direction.
That's the psychological shift. I stop using my will to force my desired outcome, and instead I use my will to choose to follow the suggested path, like the steps themselves.
And when our will lines up with that broader, healthier direction,
The collisions stop. The frustration eases. We're not fighting the current anymore, we're working with it. The decision in step 3 is essentially flipping the switch on our internal operating system, from self-will to good, orderly direction.
Okay, this leads perfectly into the listener's core question. How do I do this practically, day to day? Because, let's be honest, that initial feeling of surrender can fade. The ego puffs back up. And suddenly, I'm back trying to run the show again.
Absolutely. That initial decision is just cracking the door open. The practice of step 3 is choosing to walk through that door every single day.
The Al-Anon literature is really helpful here. It stresses that this isn't a one-and-done thing.
It needs reinforcement, daily reinforcement. They suggest making that decision consciously at the start of each day, reminding yourself, today, I choose to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand Him.
So what does that actually look like when my feet hit the floor in the morning? Is it saying the third step prayer? Or something more?
It can start with the prayer, for sure, but it's also about setting an intention, a conscious assertion. Okay, I'm starting my day choosing to accept reality, choosing to move in a healthy direction, guided by something bigger than my own fears or desires.
Kind of like an internal declaration. Not my will, but thine be done, essentially.
In essence, yes. I'm not in charge today, but I'm available to be guided. And doing that daily keeps the door open for the work of the later steps, like self-examination in 4 and 5, because you've established your willingness to be guided.
You mentioned good orderly direction, God, as the alternative operating system. Let's talk about using that as a practical tool throughout the day.
It's incredibly practical. Think about the choices you face constantly. The old self-will always asks, what outcome do I want, and how can I force it? How can I minimize my discomfort or maximize my control?
Right. Always calculating the angles.
God prompts a different set of questions. Al-Anon suggests asking, what path here enhances my self-esteem? What aligns with the miraculous self I've been given? Which choice leads towards integrity, honesty, service, rather than fear, manipulation, or isolation?
So let's take an example.
Uh,
I have a potentially difficult conversation coming up at work. Self-will might mean I rehearse arguments, plan my attack, try to win.
right. You're focused on controlling the outcome and the other person.
Whereas the God approach might be, what? Praying first?
It could be praying for guidance, praying for the right words, praying for the willingness to listen. It might mean deciding to show up with humility, speak your truth calmly and honestly, and then crucially accept the outcome, whatever it is, without needing it to match your specific expectation.
That's the letting go part in action.
That's exactly the decision in practice. It changes how you engage with challenges. You start setting aside that relentless need to figure everything out on your own, which is a huge source of stress for so many of us.
Some sources, like A Woman's Way, connect this to acknowledging limits.
Yeah.
Sitting still, surrendering, being willing to receive guidance instead of always striving.
Yes, it links directly to the practices often associated with Step 11 prayer and meditation. These aren't just about asking for things, they're about reinforcing Step 3, acknowledging you don't have all the answers, quieting the mental chatter, and creating space to receive direction.
And that direction isn't usually a booming voice from the sky, is it?
Rarely. It's more often an intuition, a sense of the next right thing, a feeling of peace about one course of action versus another, or maybe guidance coming through another person or something you read.
And the 12 by 12 clarifies the kind of prayer involved here, doesn't it? It reinforces Step 3.
It does. It emphasizes that we're not praying for specific outcomes or for our wishes to be granted like a cosmic vending machine. We're praying primarily for knowledge of God's will for us in this situation and the power, the strength, the willingness to carry that out.
So instead of God, please make my boss like my proposal, it's more like,
More like, God, please show me how I can best contribute in this meeting today. Help me speak clearly and listen well and give me the serenity to accept whatever happens. You're redirecting your will away from manipulating outcomes and towards being useful and aligned.
so the practical daily doing of Step 3 is really about this continuous, moment-by-moment intellectual and behavioral pivot, choosing guidance over ego.
Choosing good, orderly direction over your own often faulty, fear-driven impulses. And knowing that when you inevitably slip up, when ego grabs the wheel back,
Which happens.
which absolutely happens, the decision is always there to be remade. You just notice it, gently correct course, and reaffirm the commitment. Turn back to the decision.
Okay, so for someone considering this, maybe feeling hesitant about letting go of that control, they need to know,
Yeah.
what's the payoff? Why go through the ego deflation? What are the real results of making and practicing this Step 3 decision?
The results can be felt quite quickly, actually, even if the deeper transformation takes time. There's often an immediate sense of relief, a spiritual lift,
Just from making the decision.
just from that humble invocation of his help, as one guide puts it, and that simple willingness to be freed from the old ways of thinking. There's a release that comes from just acknowledging, okay, I don't have to carry this massive burden all by myself anymore.
And we said earlier, this decision is the foundation for everything else. When you combine it with the later steps, the inventory, the amends, the ongoing connection.
That's when you start building what the literature calls an unshakable foundation for life. It's not just about stopping the destructive behavior, it's about building a whole new way of living. It creates a new kinship, a new relationship with your higher power and with other people too.
Because your whole way of interacting changes. You're not operating from fear and self-interest as much.
Exactly. The source of your decisions shifts from being purely internal, often chaotic and fear-based, to being connected to something external, more stable and trustworthy.
Now, probably the most compelling evidence for the payoff comes from those specific promises listed in the Big Book. They're tied directly to taking these steps. These aren't just nice ideas, they're described as predictable outcomes.
They are incredibly powerful and worth looking at closely. They paint a picture of a life that's radically different from the one run on self-will.
What's the first one?
First, we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. And linked to that, we will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. That internal chaos starts to quiet down.
Huge. And then there's the past.
Yes, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. That's massive. Think about how much energy gets consumed by shame, guilt, and resentment about yesterday. The promise is that this burden lifts.
So you're not constantly haunted or defined by past mistakes. That frees up so much mental space.
It really does. Second major area. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-pity will slip away. Feelings of uselessness disappear. This is that fundamental shift from self-centeredness, which is often at the root of addiction, towards connection and service.
From being a taker to being a giver, in a sense. That heals the isolation.
Absolutely. And third, very practically, fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. Now, this doesn't mean you'll suddenly become a millionaire or that everyone will love you.
Right, it's not magical immunity.
No, but that paralyzing fear, that constant anxiety about money or social situations, it starts to dissipate. There's a growing trust that you'll be taken care of, that you have resources beyond just yourself.
Okay, and the last ones are maybe the most profound, spiritually speaking.
They are. The promise is, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. That guidance we talked about, that good orderly direction starts to flow more naturally. You find yourself responding differently, more effectively, without having to painfully figure everything out.
Less forcing, more flowing.
Exactly. And the culmination, the ultimate promise, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. That moment of grace where you see clearly that the struggle is over because a higher power is actively working in your life, the fight is done.
Wow. That really is the definition of freedom, isn't it? Moving from being baffled and controlled by situations to handling them intuitively, peacefully. The decision in step 3 really is the launch pad away from that delusion and controlling mindset towards reality and letting go.
It's the doorway to that peace. The whole program, really, starting with this decision, helps address the core vulnerabilities that made addiction take root and allows for rebuilding on that truly unshakable foundation.
Well, this has been incredibly helpful. A really thorough deep dive into what seems like such a simple step, but one that holds so much weight. So, back to our listener's original question. How do I do step 3?
The takeaway is, it's one conscious, simple decision, you make it, and then you practice reinforcing it, ideally every day.
That's the core. It's the moment you decide to stop fighting the current, stop trying to row upstream against life.
And just choose to trust the flow, trust that there's a wiser direction available than your own. That's the decision. Using your will rightly starts right there.
And that decision makes you receptive to the help you need for all the steps that follow. The real work of change begins once you've made that commitment.
Exactly. The whole point of the steps, you could argue, is to align our will with that better, healthier intention, God's intention, as the literature puts it. Step 3 is just opening the door. The rest of the steps are how we walk through it and learn to live on the other side.
So, a final thought for you, our listener, inspired by what we've discussed today. Think about this paradox. Your addiction, or the problem that brought you here, might have been characterized by a desperate need for control. Yet the solution offered in step 3 is fundamentally about letting go, about having faith, about surrender.
How can it be that the very act your ego screams is defeat surrender is actually the most direct route to the freedom, the power, and the peace you've been searching for? That's something profound to sit with as you consider making or remaking that vital third step decision.